Millionaire's daughter had never walked, until he caught the nanny in the act and couldn't believe it. Seattle's skyline gleamed in the soft light of early morning, its glass towers reflecting a city always in motion. But inside the penthouse apartment of Nathaniel Carter, time seemed to move differently. Slower, quieter, weighed down by memories and silence. Nathaniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. His gaze wasn't fixed on the horizon, or the ferries gliding across Puget Sound. It was on the reflection in the glass, not himself, but the little girl behind him, sitting still on the living room floor. Emily, for years old, brown curls, wide eyes, and legs that had never carried her a single step. She sat there as she always did, back straight, a picture book open in her lap. No attempt to crawl or shift position, just stillness. It had become her natural state. The doctors had called it idiopathic hypotonia, low muscle tone with no known cause. But deeper than the diagnosis was a mystery, why a child who had no physical impediment simply would not walk. Nathaniel turned away from a window, watching her. The same question haunted him every morning. Why not her first step today? He had built skyscrapers across the country, designed award-winning homes for the wealthy and powerful. But here, in the one space that mattered most, he felt helpless. "Morning, sweetheart," he said softly, crouching down beside her. Emily looked up, smiled faintly, then turned a page. That smile, it always cracked something open in him. She looked so much like her mother. Claire had died giving birth to Emily, a rare complication. One moment, they were laughing in the delivery room. The next, a flat line on the monitor. He'd never even gotten to say goodbye. He remembered the nurse putting Emily in his arms, a tiny, wailing bundle of life wrapped in the silence of death. He'd held her with shaking arms and made a promise he didn't know how to keep. "I'll do everything, Emily, for you, for her." But how do you raise a child when grief is the room's constant companion? The first year had been a blur of sleepless nights and shadowed days. Therapists came and went. Family offered help, but their words fell hollow. Nathaniel threw himself into work, hiring live-in nannies to care for Emily, but none lasted. Something always felt off. Too formal, too inattentive, too impatient with Emily's condition. Now, with his firm pressuring him to return full-time to a new project in Chicago, he was running out of options. Emily needed consistency, someone she could trust, someone who didn't treat her like a problem to be solved. He sat beside her on the rug and ran a hand through his thick, dark hair. "You know, you're going to walk one day," he whispered. "I know it. I can feel it." Emily didn't respond, but he thought, maybe. Her fingers paused on the page for half a second. Later that morning, he stood in the kitchen with Marla, the current nanny, a well-meaning woman in her 50s who had already given notice. "She's a sweet girl," Marla said gently, "but she's closed off, Mr. Carter. She doesn't reach out. She doesn't explore. Children need to explore." "I know," Nathaniel said, eyes tired. "I've tried everything." Marla hesitated, then added, "Sometimes it's not about trying harder. It's about trying different." That phrase stuck with him long after she left. That night, Nathaniel went through the stack of caregiver resumes his assistant had sent. Most were unimpressive, either too underqualified or too clinical. But one stood out: Rachel Dawson, 26, former pediatric occupational therapist, calm temperament, excellent references. Her cover letter was handwritten. Who did that anymore? "I don't believe every child fits inside a box," it read. "Sometimes you have to sit on the floor and wait for their world to open." The next morning, Nathaniel called her in for an interview. Rachel arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, dressed simply, hair in a braid. She greeted Emily first, not him, kneeling beside her with quiet ease. Emily glanced up from her book, gave the same faint smile, but didn't retreat. It was the first time Nathaniel had seen her respond to someone new without recoiling. "She doesn't talk much," he said. "That's okay," Rachel replied, eyes still on Emily. "I do not mind quiet. There's a lot to hear in it." They talked in the study for nearly an hour. Rachel's voice was soft but steady. She had worked with children who had suffered trauma, children who had been adopted, children with undiagnosed developmental delays. But more than her qualifications, it was her stillness that impressed him. She wasn't eager to prove herself. She was simply present. "I believe kids move when they feel safe," she said, sipping tea. "And sometimes when they don't move, it's because they're protecting something." That night, Nathaniel offered her the position. And just like that, everything began to change. Slowly, subtly, like the shift of a tide you don't notice until your feet are wet. But he had no idea just how deep the waters would get. Rachel's presence in the Carter home was quiet, but not passive. She moved through the apartment with an unspoken awareness, observing without intruding, listening without judgment. Nathaniel noticed it first in the silence, not the heavy kind that had once clung to every room, but something lighter, almost intentional. Emily, for her part, didn't resist her new nanny. That alone was a shift. In the past, she had withdrawn from unfamiliar faces, often retreating into herself for days. But with Rachel, there was no retreat, just cautious observation, the kind that held potential. Rachel had started her first day by sitting beside Emily, not saying much. She didn't offer toys or books or silly voices. She simply sat. After several minutes, she placed a small wooden bird on the rug between them. Smooth, hand-carved, its wings slightly lifted as if in flight. Emily reached for it without hesitation. Nathaniel had watched from the hallway, heart tightening at the sight. He didn't interfere. Instead, he observed from the shadows, try to understand what Rachel was doing differently. It wasn't just kindness. There was a rhythm to it, a patience he couldn't replicate. Within the first week, small changes began to surface. Emily started humming, a soft, wandering tune that danced just above a whisper. She'd never done that before. And she began watching Rachel more intently, following her with her eyes as she moved around the apartment, her gaze alert, expectant. By the end of the second week, Rachel had set a gentle routine in place. Breakfast was served by 7:30 in the morning, always with something fresh: berries, soft toast, warm oatmeal. Afterward came reading time in the sunroom, then outdoor play in the private garden if the weather allowed. There was no forced participation, only invitation. Nathaniel, initially skeptical of such an unstructured approach, found himself watching these interactions with growing interest. Emily seemed lighter, more willing to engage with the world. Her shoulders, once permanently slumped, now sat straighter. And there was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when Rachel entered the room and Emily raised her arms, not to be picked up, but in greeting. Then came the afternoon Nathaniel would never forget. It was raining, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that made the city blur behind the windows. Nathaniel had left work earlier than usual, a mild headache pressing behind his eyes. He entered the apartment quietly, unsure whether to announce himself or let the day's rhythm continue, without interruption. From the hallway, he heard music, not a stereo or television, real music. A piano, slow, deliberate notes, not from professional, but from someone playing with care. Curious, he followed the sound. In the living room, Rachel sat at the small upright piano Claire had insisted on keeping, despite Nathaniel's claim that no one played it. Her fingers moved slowly across the keys, forming a tune he couldn't place. Beside her, seated on a cushion, was Emily, upright, attentive, eyes fixed on Rachel's hands. Nathaniel leaned against the doorway, not making a sound. Then something strange happened. Rachel paused in her playing and turned slightly toward Emily. She extended her right hand, index and middle fingers tapping the air 3 times in succession. Emily mimicked the gesture, once, twice, 3 times, her face completely serious. Rachel responded with a new gesture, a gentle rolling motion with her wrist. Emily nodded and placed her hands flat on her knees. Nathaniel blinked. It looked like a game, but not one he'd ever seen before. And it didn't feel like play. There was something coded in the exchange, something deliberate. Rachel resumed playing. Later that evening, after Rachel had taken Emily to bed, Nathaniel stopped her in the kitchen. "That song you played," he began. "What was it?" Rachel rinsed a cup and placed it upside down to dry. "A lullaby from my childhood." My grandmother used to play it. Emily seemed to like the rhythm. He nodded slowly. And the hand signals? What were those? She dried her hands, meeting his gaze calmly. Just something to help her focus. It keeps her engaged. Nathaniel didn't press further, though the image stayed with him. The way Emily had responded so precisely, like they'd been practicing. The days continued, each one offering subtle but unmistakable changes. Emily began making sounds, not quite words, but fragments of syllables. She grunted softly when she wanted a toy. She laughed, a quick, surprised sound, when Rachel twirled in the hallway or sang off-key. And most shockingly, she started to rise, slowly, shakily, to her knees during play, sometimes pushing herself to stand for a brief second before settling back down. The first time it happened, Rachel didn't react. She didn't cheer or clap. She simply waited, eyes soft, as if saying, "I see you, but only when you're ready to be seen." Nathaniel, who witnessed one of these attempts from his office doorway, nearly dropped his phone. He wanted to speak to Rachel about it, but he feared disrupting whatever fragile trust had formed between them. So he waited, watching, collecting moments like puzzle pieces. Then, on a Thursday morning, he caught something he couldn't ignore. He had forgotten his briefcase and returned home only 10 minutes after leaving. As he entered quietly through the front door, voices floated from the sunroom. Not loud, but distinct. Rachel's voice was low, melodic, almost like chanting. And Emily's, her voice, unmistakably, responded. Creeping closer, Nathaniel peeked into the room. Rachel was seated cross-legged on a rug, eyes closed. Emily stood, wobbly but upright, facing her. No support. Her arms were out slightly for balance, her knees trembling. Nathaniel's breath caught. Rachel opened her eyes, smiled, and extended her hand. Emily took one shaky step forward. Then Rachel said, softly but firmly, "Down." Immediately, Emily collapsed into a seated position, just as the front door creaked behind Nathaniel. Rachel stood up quickly, turning toward the sound. She hadn't seen him yet, but Emily had, and her eyes were wide with panic. Not fear of falling, but fear of being seen. He stepped forward, slowly, and Emily turned away. Rachel finally met his eyes. Nathaniel's voice was barely above a whisper. She stood. She took a step. Rachel nodded once. "Yes. But why? Why did she sit down when you told her to?" Rachel looked away, then back, because she wasn't ready for you to know. Nathaniel felt as though the floor had tilted beneath him. Questions crowded his mind, but none found voice. He simply stared, stunned, as Rachel crossed the room to check on Emily, who now sat silently, head lowered. Everything he thought he knew about his daughter, about her condition, was unraveling. And deep down, a darker thought took root. Had Emily been able to walk all along? He didn't ask it. Not yet. But that night, long after the apartment had gone quiet, he retrieved a small box from his study and began setting up what he'd always promised himself he'd never do: hidden cameras. If the truth was unfolding in his own home, he wasn't going to miss another second of it. Nathaniel hadn't slept properly in 3 nights. Every evening, once Rachel and Emily had gone to bed, he would sit alone in his home office, watching hours of footage from the hidden cameras he'd installed in the corners of the main rooms. He felt a sick sense of guilt doing it, the invasive nature of it, the breach of trust, but the shock of seeing Emily's stand, of watching her obey a command collapse, had left him without a better option. He had to know what was going on, and the footage was showing him things he wasn't prepared to see. It started subtly. Rachel would sit beside Emily on the living room rug, whispering to her in a calm, sing-song voice. Her words were soft, indistinct from the camera's position, but her hands did most of communicating. She used gestures, rhythmic and deliberate, tapping her fingers in sets, tracing shapes in the air, rotating her wrists in controlled motions. Emily watched each movement with careful attention, then mimicked them with eerie precision. It looked like sign language, but it wasn't any formal version Nathaniel recognized. These weren't words or commands. They seemed to carry emotion, intention, like a private system built on trust and repetition. But it went further than hand signals. Rachel had created a world with Emily, one where movement wasn't forbidden or forced, but treated like a secret. In the footage, Nathaniel saw moments where Emily would rise slowly to her feet, wobble, take a half step forward. She was walking. Unstable, yes. Slow, yes. But undeniably walking. Then, each time, Rachel would pause, glance toward the hallway as if checking for sounds, and give a signal. Emily would immediately stop and lower herself back down. Nathaniel had watched 5 of these moments in different rooms across 3 days. And each time, the routine was the same. Emily never walked when anyone else was nearby. Never in full light. Never when the house felt awake. He shut the laptop one night, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. His pulse was erratic, his chest tight. There was a strange emotional conflict tearing through him. Awe at Emily's progress. Betrayal at being left out of it. Confusion over Rachel's intentions. Why was Rachel hiding this from him? The next day, Nathaniel came home early again, unannounced. This time, there was no music, no strange gestures, just the sound of laughter, actual, full-bodied laughter, coming from Emily. He stood frozen outside the sunroom door listening. She was giggling uncontrollably, and Rachel was making exaggerated animal noises. A giraffe with hiccups, judging by the rhythm. Nathaniel leaned silently against the wall, torn between joy and frustration. He hadn't heard his daughter laugh like that in years, if ever. Then it happened again. There was a pause in the sounds. Then a soft thud. He peeked carefully through the crack in the door. Emily stood upright, holding on to the edge of a couch cushion. Rachel was sitting beside her on the floor, hands folded in her lap, simply watching. Emily took one step, then another, toward a stack of colorful blocks. No command was given this time. No gesture. Emily walked because she wanted to. Nathaniel felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning. But just as he stepped forward into the room, Rachel glanced toward the door and said calmly, "Emily." The girl froze, then slowly sat back down. He entered the room, pretending he had seen nothing. "I got off early," he said, voice rougher than intended. Rachel looked up with a polite smile. "We were just playing. She had a lot of energy today." "I heard." He kept his voice measured. "You're good with her." "Thank you." Rachel tilted her head slightly, a trace of concern crossing her face. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, searching her eyes. "I need to understand something." Rachel's expression shifted, not to fear, but to something more guarded. "In private," he added. She nodded, rose quietly, and followed him to the study. Once inside, Nathaniel closed the door and leaned against the desk. "I've seen her walk," he said. "I saw it with my own eyes. And I've seen her respond to your signals. The way she drops the moment she hears someone approach. Rachel, what's going on?" Rachel didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. "She's afraid," she said softly. "Of me?" His voice cracked. Rachel nodded once. "Not of you as a person. Of what you feel when you see her. She feels responsible for your sadness, for your silence. Children notice more than we ever expect. And Emily, she's been absorbing your grief for years." Nathaniel sat slowly in the chair behind his desk, her words hitting deeper than he was ready for. "You're saying she chose not to walk because she thought it would hurt me?" Rachel took a deep breath. "Because she thought your sadness was tied to her condition, that walking would somehow break something sacred, like she was all you had left to hold on to." Nathaniel stared at her. "But I would never." "You wouldn't. But pain doesn't have to be spoken to be passed on." There was a long silence between them. The soft tick of the old wall clock marked time that neither of them knew how to fill. Then Nathaniel asked a question he'd been holding back. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel hesitated. "Because if I had, you would have tried to fix it. You would have pushed, begged, gotten therapists involved again. But this wasn't about therapy. It was about safety, about trust. She needed to walk for herself, not for you, not for anyone watching, just for her." He didn't know what to say to that. The weight of it was staggering. That night, Nathaniel didn't review the footage. He didn't pace or brood or sit awake in the dark. Instead, he stood at the edge of Emily's doorway and watched her sleep. Her chest rose and fell slowly, arms curled beneath her cheek. For the first time in a long while, she looked truly at peace. He realized how little he had actually understood his daughter. He had been present, yes, always providing, always protecting. But he hadn't seen her. Not really. The next morning, Nathaniel entered the kitchen while Rachel prepared breakfast. "I won't interfere," he said, pouring himself coffee. "But I want to be part of her world again, however I can." Rachel gave a small nod. "Then you have to let go of what you want her to be and see her for who she already is." He looked toward the hallway, where Emily had just crawled out with her favorite book in hand. "I'm trying," he whispered, and from the corner of his eye, he saw Rachel raise 2 fingers in the air, a gentle, familiar motion. Emily, already watching, smiled. She didn't get up. Not yet, but something in her shifted, and Nathaniel knew. The real beginning had just arrived. Nathaniel had intended to remove the hidden cameras once he confronted Rachel. After all, he had already gotten his answer. Emily could walk, and there was a reason she hadn't shown him. But something about the quiet corners of the footage still pulled at him. Not suspicion, exactly. Curiosity. There was a dimension to his daughter's world he still couldn't access, and the recordings had become his reluctant window into it. So he left them, just for a few more days. It was a Thursday evening when he found what he hadn't known to look for. The apartment was silent. Emily had gone to sleep early after a long session in the garden, not walking, but pushing a small wooden cart Rachel had brought from somewhere. Nathaniel sat at his desk with a tumbler of untouched whiskey, eyes fixed on his laptop screen. The footage from the living room began with Rachel entering at 3:20 in the afternoon, carrying a tray of paints, brushes, and thick paper. Emily followed closely behind her, crawling still, but faster, more purposeful than before. They sat on the rug. Rachel laid out the materials without saying much. Then, with the fluid familiarity of someone who had done this before, she began painting beside the child. Large abstract shapes, swirls of blue and gold. Emily dipped her fingers into yellow and slowly pressed them onto the paper. But that wasn't what made Nathaniel sit forward. Half an hour in, Rachel set down her brush, turned toward Emily, and made a series of precise gestures. Not the soft, childlike signals Nathaniel had seen before. These were sharper, intentional, like sign language, but more condensed. Emily watched closely, then responded with gestures of her own. Nathaniel muted the audio, even though there was barely any sound. He didn't want distraction. His eyes followed the exchange, Rachel signing, Emily nodding. Then Emily stood. Fully. She didn't stagger or hesitate. She walked, across the carpet, paused, turned, and returned to Rachel. No hands outstretched for balance. No wobbling. She had full control. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. This was more than progress. This was mastery. And then Rachel did something even stranger. She leaned in, whispered something near Emily's ear, and gently placed a hand over the child's chest. Not pushing, not guiding, just resting. Emily closed her eyes and exhaled. Then Rachel tapped twice on the paper in front of them and pointed to the door. Emily immediately dropped to her knees and resumed crawling. Nathaniel paused the video, stunned. This wasn't just encouragement or support. This was coordination. Rachel wasn't helping Emily recover her mobility. She was managing her secrecy, maintaining it, reinforcing it. The realization struck hard. Rachel wasn't just aware of Emily's ability. She was orchestrating the concealment of it. The next morning, Nathaniel didn't mention what he had seen. Instead, he observed quietly over breakfast. Rachel served scrambled eggs and toast. Emily in her usual seat, legs dangling freely. The girl smiled at the plate and muttered something that almost resembled the word more. It was barely there, but it made Nathaniel's chest ache. Rachel smiled too, handed her another slice of toast, and said, "You're using your words, sweetheart." It felt wrong to be angry at someone who spoke so gently to his daughter. But the footage kept replaying in his head. The decision to hide the truth hadn't just come from Emily's fear. It was being actively supported, reinforced, protected. Why? Later that day, Nathaniel reviewed older footage. He hadn't been meticulous about it before, only watched highlights, focused on movement. But now he looked closer, and what he saw stunned him. Patterns. Every time Rachel used specific gestures, Emily responded with certain actions. There was a rhythm to it, a form of training. Over days, Rachel had introduced movements slowly, from kneeling to half-standing to full steps. She rewarded each success with a soft gesture, sometimes a tap on the shoulder, sometimes a hand over the chest. Always the same motions. But there was more. Nathaniel skipped back to a video from 2 weeks earlier. Rachel and Emily sat in the study, a room Emily rarely visited. On the desk, a stack of flashcards, not the typical kind with letters or colors. These were symbols, triangles, waves, suns with spirals. Rachel held one up, gestured something simple, and Emily nodded. Then she raised both arms and repeated the motion. Nathaniel froze the frame. The symbol on the card was nearly identical to one Claire used in an old notebook, a spiral sun she often doodled on recipe cards or gift notes. He remembered it clearly. She called it her focus symbol, said it helped her center herself. He went to the bookshelf and pulled down a leather-bound journal, Claire's. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside, he flipped to the center and found what he was looking for. The same spiral sun, sketched repeatedly along the margin. What was Rachel doing with it? He didn't believe in coincidences anymore. That evening, when Rachel sat reading with Emily, Nathaniel interrupted gently. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, keeping his voice light. "Those hand signs you use with Emily, did you develop them yourself?" Rachel looked up, surprised. "Most of them. Some are adapted from therapy techniques I've used before." "What about the cards?" he pressed. "The symbols?" Her expression didn't change. "They're just visual tools. For attention, engagement." He nodded slowly, studying her face. "They're similar to ones my wife used." Rachel's eyes softened. Claire was a remarkable woman. I remember her from college. Nathaniel blinked. "You knew her?" Rachel smiled faintly. "We had a few classes together. She was always drawing the margins. Spirals, mostly." He stepped back slightly, mind racing. "You never mentioned that before." "I didn't think it mattered," she said calmly. "It wasn't close. But when I saw Emily for the first time, I recognized something. Not in her face, in her silence. It reminded me of the stillness Claire used to carry before she spoke." Nathaniel didn't respond. He walked away, heart pounding, thoughts clashing. Rachel had known Claire, and now she was using her symbols, her gestures, teaching them to Emily, helping his daughter unlock something he'd been blind to. That night, Nathaniel watched the most recent footage once more. In the final clip, just before dinner, Rachel had knelt beside Emily after a successful step and whispered again, this time loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "You're doing so well. He'll see it soon, and he'll be ready." Nathaniel closed the laptop. He didn't feel betrayed anymore. He felt something else entirely. Wonder. Because maybe Rachel hadn't been hiding Emily's progress from him. Maybe she had been preparing him to see it. The next morning, Nathaniel didn't watch the cameras. He didn't need to. What Rachel had whispered, he'll see it soon, and he'll be ready, played on loop in his mind, not as a warning, but as a promise. He had spent weeks chasing a truth that had been carefully placed before him in pieces. Like breadcrumbs scattered in a forest, he was too distracted to navigate. But now, everything looked different, and he was no longer walking blindly. He spent the morning in his home office, pacing between the windows and the bookshelves, waiting for the right moment. Finally, just before noon, he called Rachel into the room. She came in calmly, hands folded, as if expecting the conversation. "I want to understand," he said without preamble. "All of it." Rachel didn't feign confusion or dodge the request. She sat in the chair across from him and nodded. "Emily walks," Nathaniel began. "That part I've accepted. And I've accepted that she hasn't shown me because of what she feels, what she sees in me. You explain that." Rachel didn't interrupt. "But what I still don't understand is this." He pulled Claire's journal from the drawer and set it gently on the desk. "You said you knew Claire in college. You said you remembered her drawings. These..." He flipped to the page with the spiral sun. You've been using them with Emily. Rachel looked at the symbol, then back at him. Yes. Why? Nathaniel asked, voice tightening. How does a college memory become a therapeutic tool for my daughter 4 years after Claire's death? What are you really doing here? Rachel took a long breath. I didn't come here with a plan, Nathaniel. I didn't even know if you'd hire me. When I saw the posting, I wasn't sure what it meant that your name came up. But then I saw the child in the photo, Emily, and I remembered something Claire said to me in our second year. Nathaniel sat down slowly. She told me once, Rachel continued, that if anything ever happened to her, she hoped the people who truly understood silence would help raise a child. He stared at her, unable to speak. She wasn't predicting her death, Rachel added quickly. She said it in passing, one of those offhand remarks people make when they're pregnant or thinking about the future. But it stuck with me. Nathaniel's voice returned, rough and low. Claire never told me you two were friends. We weren't, not closely, Rachel said, but we were in the same meditation group for 2 semesters. And we talked. A few lunches, a few long walks. She was luminous, the kind of person who saw the world 5 layers deeper than most. She told me things most people wouldn't tell acquaintances. I think she trusted that I wasn't trying to fix her. Nathaniel opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He felt like a guest in his own memories. After Claire died, Rachel went on, I didn't reach out. It didn't feel right. I barely knew you, and I didn't want to intrude. But when I saw the listing, I recognized your name. I recognized Emily's eyes, and I applied. He looked down at his hands. You should have told me. Maybe, she said, but I didn't come here to stir up your past. I came to help a child who didn't know how to ask for help. And when I saw her, how still she was, how tightly she held herself, I knew it wasn't just physical, it was deeper. Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. Not anger, but the crumbling of the wall he had built around his understanding of Rachel. But why the symbols, he asked. Why use Claire's drawings? Because Claire used them for grounding, Rachel replied. She told me they help her organize her emotions. She used them during meditation, during anxiety. And I saw those same signs in Emily, not just in her body, but in her silence. So I started drawing the symbols on cards, just to see, and she responded. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. So all this time, he said quietly, you've been building a language with her. Rachel nodded, not a formal one, but yes, a language of trust. There was a long silence between them, filled with something heavier than words. Then Rachel added, you're not the problem, Nathaniel, but you're part of the system that's been holding her still. You don't mean to be, but grief has a shape, and she's been curling herself into it for 4 years. He closed the journal slowly, pressing his palm over the leather cover. So what do I do now? Now, Rachel said gently. You let her lead. That afternoon, Nathaniel did just that. He didn't interrupt the routines. He didn't hover. Instead, he stayed nearby, present but silent, as Rachel guided Emily through the day. He watched as they painted in the sunroom. Emily's strokes more confident now. He watched as Rachel tapped her shoulder, and Emily stood without hesitation to reach for a new color. And he saw the moment when Emily noticed him watching and didn't retreat. It was small, but it was a beginning. That night, after Rachel had gone home, Nathaniel found himself wandering the apartment aimlessly. He passed the guest room, Rachel's usual space, then paused at the hallway closet. Something tugged at him. He opened the door, rummaging through a box of Claire's things he hadn't touched since the funeral. At the bottom was a letter. His heart stopped when he saw the handwriting. Claire's. The envelope was unsealed, addressed simply, Nathaniel, if I don't make it through. He opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was familiar, fluid, strong. If you're reading this, it means the worst has happened. I don't know what form it will take, but I've felt something coming for a long time. Maybe that's paranoia, or maybe it's a mother's intuition. I need you to do something for me. Actually, I need you to do something for her. Let her be who she is. Not who you need her to be, not who the world expects her to be. Just her. She'll speak when she's ready. She'll walk when she's ready. Don't rush her. Don't mold her. And if someone comes into her life who understands her better than we ever could, let them stay. Please, Nathaniel, don't shut the world out. Not for her sake. Not for yours. Nathaniel folded the letter slowly, hands trembling. He stood in the quiet hallway for a long time, the silence pressing in, but not crushing. The next morning, he found Rachel in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "I read her letter," he said simply. Rachel looked at him, surprised, but said nothing. "She asked me to let someone in. Someone who could see Emily better than I could." Rachel nodded once. "Then she already knew what kind of father you'd be." Nathaniel's voice was barely a whisper. "She knew I'd need help." "You're not failing her," Rachel said. "You're just finally learning how to be present." Nathaniel looked toward the hallway, where Emily was standing, not walking, not crawling, just standing at the edge of the doorframe, watching him. This time he didn't freeze. He smiled and knelt down. "Come here, sweetheart," he said softly. She didn't run. She didn't take a step, but she smiled back, and that was enough. For now, Nathaniel didn't tell Rachel immediately about the letter. He carried it in his pocket for 2 days, folding and unfolding it with fingertips worn thin from worry. He read it in the car while waiting at red lights, read it again at night when the house went still, and once in the middle of the afternoon, standing motionless in the garden while Emily played with a small wooden cart, her balance improving in quiet increments. The letter didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like instructions, a blueprint, precise and purposeful. Claire had always been that way, intuitive to the point of discomfort, often knowing what people needed before they themselves did. She had seen through Nathaniel's stoic exterior when they first met, breaking him open with nothing more than her gentle certainty. Now, even in death, she had left pieces behind to guide them both. On the third morning, while reorganizing old boxes in the attic room Claire once used as a studio, Nathaniel found something else, a worn leather folder, tucked inside a stack of unused canvases. Inside it, there were 2 more letters. Both were sealed. One was addressed to Rachel Dawson, the other to Emily, for when you're ready. He stared at the names, the neat loops of Claire's penmanship echoing off the silence of the room. There was no date, no explanation, only the names and the care in the writing. It took him nearly an hour to climb down the narrow attic stairs, and another 2 before he knocked on the guest room door where Rachel stayed on most nights. She opened it in her usual quiet, her hair tied back, a paperback tucked under her arm. "I found something," he said. Rachel's eyes flicked to the envelope in his hand. She said nothing as she took it. Nathaniel didn't stay to watch her read it. He simply returned to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared at the steam until the cup went cold. When she came to find him nearly an hour later, her face was pale, not shaken. Rachel rarely betrayed emotion that way, but humbled, grounded. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "She wrote this before Emily was born," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "She remembered me better than I realized." He didn't ask what the letter said. Not yet. Instead, he placed a second envelope on the counter. "I'm keeping this one," he said, "for Emily, when she's old enough." Rachel looked at it for a long moment. That's what Claire would have wanted. Then she sat across from him and, for the first time since she'd entered their lives, began to speak not as a caregiver, but as someone who'd been carrying her own unanswered questions. She always talked about time like it was a fabric, Rachel said, her gaze distant, that it stretches and shifts around grief, that what you lose doesn't disappear, it just goes quiet. Nathaniel felt the weight of her words like gravity. She asked me once if I believed that love could echo through other people. I didn't understand what she meant then. I think I do now. He wanted to respond, but the air between them held too much history, spoken and unspoken, for words to be useful. That afternoon, Nathaniel found Emily sitting by the window with her coloring book. The light from the glass cast soft gold over her face, and for a moment, she looked so much like Claire it made his breath catch. He sat beside her, close but not imposing. She looked up briefly, then returned to her drawing. "Do you like stories?" he asked. She paused, crayon in hand, then nodded once. He took a slow breath. Your mom used to write stories. Lots of them. Some just for me. Some just for you. Emily tilted her head. Her eyes didn't quite meet his. But they were listening. She wrote you something. A letter, he continued. It's yours, but only when you're ready. Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. Her hand moved across the page, and in place of shapes or scribbles, she began to draw a spiral. Soft, looping, familiar. Nathaniel felt tears threaten the corners of his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The next day, Rachel approached him in the hallway. There's something you should see, she said. She led him into the playroom, where Emily was busy arranging small wooden blocks into tall, careful towers. Rachel pulled a file folder from the nearby shelf, one Nathaniel hadn't noticed before. Inside were notes, pages and pages of them, observations, progress records, carefully dated with handwriting that wasn't Rachel's. These were in the studio closet, Rachel explained. They're from Claire. Nathaniel picked one up, reading the lines in silence. Week 16. Stillness in the womb. Rhythmic, consistent. Not lazy. Listening. Another. Week 28. Music. Responds to low strings and woodwinds. Frowns at harsh vocals. Could be sensitivity or preference. Note for later. Auditory patterns. The notes were meticulous, stretching from the early weeks of pregnancy all the way to a few weeks before delivery. She was already building a roadmap, Rachel said. She must have known something. Nathaniel turned to the final page. There, in Claire's looping script, was a single line. She will walk in her own way, at her own time. Let no one rush her. It wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy. That evening, Nathaniel read the letters again, his own and Claire's to Rachel, and sat for a long time with the idea that maybe none of this was accidental. Maybe Emily had always been meant to learn in silence, to bloom only in the presence of those who saw without expecting, who listened without rushing. He walked to her room and opened the door softly. Emily was awake, blinking at the ceiling, clutching her stuffed fox. Can I sit with you? He asked. She didn't speak, but she patted the space beside her. Nathaniel sat. I didn't know how to be your dad, he whispered. Not really. I got scared. I wanted to fix things, and I didn't know how. I still don't. Emily reached for his hand. Nathaniel swallowed hard. But I want to learn from you, however you want to show me. She didn't reply, but she didn't let go. The room was silent, and yet somehow it felt full. Later that night, Nathaniel placed Claire's letter to Emily in a new box, along with the symbol cards, one of the small paintings from the sunroom, and a photograph of the three of them from that afternoon in the garden. He sealed it gently, labeling it with her name. One day, when she was ready, he would give it to her. But for now, he would let her walk her own path. Not behind him, not in front. The mornings felt different now. Nathaniel had stopped rushing through them, stopped treating them as checkpoints between work and obligation. Instead, he lingered. He lingered over breakfast, over the quiet sounds of Emily's slow movement down the hallway, over Rachel's steady presence in the background, blending into the rhythm of their home as naturally as breath. But rebuilding something fragile wasn't the same as building from nothing. The bond between father and daughter, once defined by cautious distance, didn't magically transform overnight. Emily still hesitated when he was near. She still tensed slightly when his voice carried more than a whisper, and she rarely initiated contact unless Rachel was present. Nathaniel noticed it. Every pause, every second guess. And though it didn't hurt in the way he expected, it was a rejection, not exactly. It exposed how much he had missed. How many moments had been lost while he grieved a wife, a future, and a version of fatherhood that had never existed. One morning, while Rachel was out running errands and Emily sat quietly at the dining table with a stack of felt-tip markers, Nathaniel made a conscious choice to sit across from her. No agenda, no instructions. She glanced at him, then at the paper. What are you drawing? He asked. Emily held up a simple shape. A house. For windows. A tree to the side. Nothing remarkable, except when the windows had a spiral inside it. He recognized the symbol instantly. "Is that the sun?" he asked, pointing. She shook her head. "Is it you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "And this is the house?" Another nod. He looked back at the spiral. "Then this is your room?" Emily's eyes searched his face. Then, slowly, she turned the page and began drawing another version of the house, this time with 2 spirals, one in the top window, one in the lower. Before he could ask, she pushed the marker into his hand. "Draw," she said. It was the first word she had spoken to him in days. Clear, measured. Nathaniel blinked, startled. "What should I draw?" he asked. Emily pointed to the space beside the second spiral. He didn't know what to do. His mind, trained for structure, architecture, scale, blanked at the request of a child's drawing. But he tried, with shaking fingers. He drew a simple figure, a circle for a head, rectangle for a body, stick arms, stick legs, a family. Emily looked at it, then back at him. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. That afternoon, when Rachel returned, Nathaniel met her at the door. "She talked to me," he said quietly. Rachel's eyebrows lifted, but she didn't overreact. "What did she say?" "One word. Draw." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then she's inviting you in." Nathaniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned his attention back toward the dining table, where Emily had moved on to lining up her markers by color. He watched her with quiet awe. She hadn't run to him. She hadn't reached out with affection, but she had made space for him at her table. And maybe that was how it began. The next few days were filled with small moments like that, testing boundaries, exploring silence. Emily would sit near him, not touching but not avoiding. She would hand him objects, a crayon, a toy figure, a puzzle piece. Each gesture felt like a note passed under a locked door. Still, there were setbacks. One morning, Nathaniel entered the sunroom to find Emily balancing on her feet, gripping the low table for support. It was the first time he'd seen her standing with such confidence without Rachel nearby. Instinctively, he moved toward her, hands outstretched. "Emily, that's amazing." She startled. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the floor hard. The sound of her fall echoed off the windows, and Nathaniel froze. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to. I just—" Emily turned away from him, crawling toward her toy box, face flushed and silent. Nathaniel didn't follow. He stood there for a long moment, then walked out without a word. Later, he found Rachel in the kitchen. "I scared her," he said. Rachel paused what she was doing. "You surprised her? That's different. She was doing something brave, and I ruined it." "No," Rachel replied gently. "You reacted like a father who's never seen his daughter take a step before. But she's not afraid of your excitement. She's afraid of what she doesn't understand in your voice. Emotion is still new to her." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I feel like I'm learning her language with the wrong alphabet." "Then keep listening," Rachel said. "She'll teach you." That evening, Nathaniel sat beside Emily on the floor, saying nothing. He didn't offer encouragement, didn't reach out. He simply mirrored her posture, legs crossed, hands on his knees, and waited. Eventually, she scooted closer, barely an inch. He didn't move. She leaned to the side until her shoulder brushed his arm. He waited again. Then she sighed, soft and low, and rested her head against him for a few seconds before pulling away. That was all. But to Nathaniel, it felt like a mile crossed. The following week, Rachel suggested an outing. "She needs new shoes," she said. "Ones that actually fit. She's growing." Nathaniel looked skeptical. "Do you think she's ready for that? Crowds, noise?" Rachel gave a small smile. "Only one way to find out." So they went. A quiet store on a weekday afternoon. Nathaniel drove while Rachel sat in the back with Emily, who clutched her stuffed fox the entire ride. She didn't speak, but she didn't protest either. At the store, Rachel let Emily set the pace. They walked slowly between shelves of tiny shoes, Rachel crouching beside her, letting her touch and explore. Nathaniel stayed back at first, watching, waiting. Then Emily picked up a small pair of silver sneakers and looked at him. "These?" he asked. She nodded. Rachel glanced at him and smiled. Back at home, They tried the shoes on. Emily sat on the rug, staring at her feet as if trying to decide whether they belonged to her. Then she stood. Rachel stayed still. Nathaniel held his breath. Emily took one step forward, then another. She didn't fall. Rachel whispered, "That's it." Nathaniel didn't say a word. He didn't clap, didn't cheer. He only knelt at her level and held his arms out slightly, not wide, not insistent. Just enough. And this time, Emily walked into them. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to, because when she placed her small hands against his chest and rested there, just for a moment, Nathaniel knew they had crossed into something new, something earned, something real. Nathaniel had begun to cherish the quiet milestones, not the grand gestures, not first words shouted into the world or confident strides across a room, but the fragile in-betweens. The way Emily now chose to sit beside him instead of across the room. The way she looked for his reaction after placing a puzzle piece correctly. The way she sometimes leaned into his shoulder and rested there for half a breath longer than before. Each moment was a thread, and together they were weaving something stronger than he had thought possible between them. But progress is never linear, and transformation rarely happens without disruption. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sky over Seattle was unusually clear, flooding the Carter home with sunlight that made every surface gleam. Nathaniel had decided to rearrange the garden furniture, clearing space for Emily to walk between the flower beds. Rachel was nearby, pruning a cluster of lavender bushes, while Emily, now wearing the silver shoes she had chosen herself, stepped cautiously along the stone path. She had already managed 5 steps unassisted that day. Her balance was shaky, but her focus was unbreakable. Rachel stood back, hands off, allowing the child to move at her own pace. Nathaniel, too, kept his distance, though every nerve in his body screamed to stay close. Emily moved past the lavender, her arms slightly out for balance. Then she turned toward the low bench near the fountain, a longer stretch than she had tried before. Rachel watched her quietly. Nathaniel's heart beat faster, but he didn't move. Emily took one step, then another. Her right foot wobbled on the uneven stone, and she fell. It wasn't a graceful drop to her knees or a soft sit like in previous attempts. Her ankle rolled sideways, her body pitched forward. She hit the ground with sharp, high-pitched yelp, arms scraping against the path, cheek pressed into the gravel. The world seemed to stop. Rachel rushed forward first, kneeling beside her with steady hands. "Emily, Emily, look at me." But the child didn't move. Her body had curled on itself, shoulders hunched, eyes clenched shut. Nathaniel was frozen, every muscle in his body tensed. Every instinct screamed to run and lift her, to hold her and make the pain vanish. But he didn't move. "Not yet." "Emily," Rachel repeated, her voice firmer. "You're okay. You're safe." The girl whimpered, but still didn't open her eyes. Rachel looked over her shoulder. Nathaniel. That broke the spell. He stepped forward, carefully crouched beside them. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "I'm here. Can you look at me?" Emily's breathing had become shallow, almost panicked. Then, as she opened her eyes, Nathaniel saw something he hadn't expected. Not pain, but terror. Not because of the fall. Because of him. She shrank back, as if bracing for something. Nathaniel's heart shattered. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he sat back, placing his hands on his knees to show he wouldn't come closer than she wanted. "You're not in trouble," he said, his voice breaking. "I promise. You didn't do anything wrong." Emily didn't speak. Her eyes flicked to Rachel, who nodded. "You're safe, Emily," Rachel repeated. "You're allowed to fall. Falling means you're trying." The girl's body remained tense, her hands clenched into fists. Nathaniel waited, his breathing slow, deliberate. "I fall all the time," he said. "I just hide it better." That made Rachel glance at him, a quiet acknowledgement. Emily blinked, her mouth twitching. Then, finally, she crawled into Rachel's lap. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she buried her face in the woman's shoulder and went still. Nathaniel nodded once, then stood and walked back into the house, carrying the weight of her silence like stone. Inside, He sat on the edge of the living room couch and dropped his head into his hands. He had made progress. He had done everything right, waited, listened, stepped back. And still, the second Emily felt vulnerable, she turned away from him, sought safety elsewhere. He stayed there for a long time, the quiet of the house pressing in on him. Later, Rachel entered, her clothes dusty from the garden. "She's resting," she said. "A few scrapes. No swelling in the ankle. She'll be okay." Nathaniel nodded, but didn't look up. Rachel walked over and sat beside him. "I know what you saw. I saw it too. She was afraid of me," he whispered. "She was afraid of being seen failing." Rachel said gently, "And for a long time, you were the person whose opinion mattered most. Still is." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I don't want her to be afraid of me." "She's not. She's afraid of disappointing you." "She's 4. Rachel tilted her head. "That's old enough to understand when a room goes quiet, when a parent goes still." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "How do I fix it?" "You don't," she said. "You let her feel it. Then you show up anyway." He opened his eyes. "Even if she doesn't want me there?" "Especially then." That evening, he waited until Rachel had gone to her room and the house had dimmed into its nighttime rhythm. Then he stepped quietly into Emily's room. She wasn't asleep. She lay curled beneath the blanket, her fox tucked under her chin, eyes open and staring at the ceiling. He sat on the floor beside the bed, careful not to get too close. "I used to think being a good dad meant being strong all the time," he said softly. "That if I showed you I was scared, you'd feel more scared." Emily didn't move, but I was wrong. The truth is, I'm scared a lot. I get scared when you fall. I get scared when you don't talk. I get scared when I don't know what you're thinking. Still no reaction. "But I want to be the kind of dad you can fall near, not the kind you hide from when you're hurting." A pause. Then, quietly, Emily shifted. She pulled the blanket down from her chin and reached one arm toward him. He took her hand gently in his, holding it without speaking. And there, in the quiet of the night, something changed. She didn't need to talk. She had answered him anyway. A quiet tension filled the Carter home after that fall in the garden. It wasn't one born of fear or anger, but a fragile recalibration. Nathaniel had spent the following days leaning into silence, watching Emily move between rooms, listening to her breath as she slept, feeling the reverberation of her presence as something both tender and transient. Then came Wednesday afternoon, when Nathaniel noticed Rachel carrying a folder with worn pages peeked out. Pages that weren't Claire's, he realized. Different handwriting, different content. The label caught his eye. Therapy journal. He recognized the handwriting as Rachel's, but the journal's look, well-used, pages worn, meant it had been with her long before she came here. He followed her into the sunroom, where Emily sat constructing a tower of soft blocks, her stance stable but cautious. "Can I look at this?" he asked, gesturing toward the journal. Rachel nodded silently and handed it over. Nathaniel settled into the armchair as she crouched beside Emily, fanning blocks across the rug. He opened the journal carefully. The first entries were from months ago, dated back to before Rachel started working with them. Each entry had a date, followed by short, precise notes. Emily shifted weight on her toes when reaching for toy. Moved from 2 to 3 half steps toward me. Attempted full stand unsupported for 2 seconds. Each entry ended with a symbol, a small spiral, triangle, wave, matching the cards Rachel used with Emily. It read like a secret chronicle of potential unlocked, of waiting and watching. He turned a few pages later and found an entry from the week of Emily's fall. Fell at garden stone path, rolled ankle, no swelling, pain reaction minimal, continued weight-bearing attempts. Assisted steps painful but tolerated. Emotionally closed during recovery, withdrawn into shell. He felt his chest constrict. It was clinical, precise, full of both distance and depth. Then he read another, dated yesterday. Emily walked unassisted in store. Held gaze briefly on Nathaniel, alliance forming. Therapist encouraged observation, not intrusion. Progress emotional as well as physical. That last line floored him. He looked up at Rachel, who was now stacking blocks alongside Emily. The child's face lit by sunlight, content in her play, unaware of the grown-up attention at her back. "You journaled all of this," he said softly, voice weighed with awe and contradiction. "Every moment, every subtle shift." Rachel nodded slowly. "I didn't just want to help Emily walk. I wanted us all to see it, for you to see it on your own terms." He flipped through more entries. There were notes not just on Emily's physical progress, but emotional ticks, moments when she laughed, when she hesitated to reach for a toy, when she looked at him with something he could almost catch in her gaze. He closed the journal gently and lifted his eyes to meet Rachel's. "Why haven't you shown me any of this before?" he asked quietly. Rachel paused. "I knew you were watching. You might not have seen everything, but you would feel it. I needed you to feel it without explanation." He realized how true that was. Words might have felt jarring. Numbers might have felt reductive. But feelings, those needed cultivating. He closed the distance between them, taking the journal in both hands. "I want to know," he said. "Every day. The good, the bad, the in-between." Rachel looked at him steadily, then at Emily. "Then you have to sit with it," she replied, without trying to fix it all. That afternoon, they made space to go through the journal together. Each entry became a memory. The time Emily started humming while she painted. The day she quit crawling in favor of standing, even if for just a moment. Rachel explained how she interpreted each turn as part of a broader pattern, a rhythm emerging, delicate and deliberate. Nathaniel added his own observations too, ones the journal didn't contain. How Emily would pause before she walked, as though choosing her steps carefully. How sometimes her gaze would lock with his during play, and they held a silent conversation. Together, they marked significant dates, small victories, emotional braveries, subtle regressions. They built a roadmap, not just of Emily's physical milestones, but of her evolving trust with her father and with Rachel. Night came, and after putting Emily to bed, Nathaniel returned the journal to the sunroom shelf. He hesitated, then slipped in a photograph he had taken earlier that day. Rachel and Emily silhouetted against late sunlight as they arranged blocks together. He placed it as a placeholder between journal pages, a reminder that healing was a shared act. Walking toward the staircase, he paused, gathering his breath. He realized that the bond he had begun forging with Emily was now deeper, not because she walked or drew or spoke, even though she was doing all those things, but because they were holding space for each other's fragility. At bedtime, he paused outside Rachel's room and smiled quietly at her closed door. He didn't need to close the gap yet, just to know it held. The plan was simple: a quiet birthday celebration in the garden, a few close friends and colleagues from the architecture firm, a cake shaped like a fox, Emily's favorite animal, and no expectations beyond a gentle afternoon. It would be her 5th birthday, and Nathaniel wanted it to feel like hers, not his redemption story. But beneath the calm preparations, there was a weight he couldn't ignore, a quiet question pulsing beneath the surface. Would she walk today? Would she show them all? He didn't say it aloud. Not to Rachel, not even to himself. But the possibility hung in the air, thick and waiting. The morning began with soft golden light spilling through the windows, casting patterns on the hardwood floors. Emily padded into the kitchen, wearing a yellow dress Rachel had helped her choose, her silver shoes scuffed from weeks of quiet use. She didn't speak much, but she gave Nathaniel a brief smile when he knelt to brush her curls behind her ear. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Emily pressed her fingers together, one of the small gestures she had developed with Rachel, and nodded. Guests began to arrive by mid-afternoon. The garden had been prepared with quiet care. Low tables scattered with sketch pads, blocks, and markers for children, soft jazz playing through the speaker system, and a gentle buffet set along the stone wall. Rachel moved through the space gracefully, greeting people as though she belonged among them, which Nathaniel was now certain she did. Emily stayed close to the house at first, watching from the shade, gripping her fox by the neck. She didn't resist when other children ran past her or when a pair of twins offered her a balloon. She simply observed, wide-eyed, absorbing it all like a quiet camera. Nathaniel tried not to hover. He let her breathe. He trusted, now, that pressure would only pull her backward. As the party settled into its rhythm, Nathaniel stepped aside to speak with an old colleague, but his eyes kept drifting to the edge of the patio where Emily stood with Rachel. They were speaking in gestures, slow and careful, like a dance meant only for them. Then Rachel crouched beside her, whispered something, and gently touched her back. Emily nodded. Nathaniel felt it before he saw it. A shift in the air, a hush in his chest. Emily took a step forward, and then another. No hand for balance. No crawl to escape. She walked, not in a rush, not drawn by desperation. She walked like she belonged in that space. One of the guests gasped. Someone else stepped back instinctively. Rachel rose slowly and remained where she was. Emily continued forward, her arms loose at her sides, legs steady and small, until she crossed the entire patio and reached the table where the cake sat. She stopped there, looked at the fox-shaped frosting, then turned her head toward Nathaniel. Their eyes met. It was not a cry for approval. It was a declaration. A child choosing to be seen, not because someone begged her to, but because she wanted to. Nathaniel moved carefully, his own legs weaker than hers in that moment. He approached her slowly, stopping just a few steps away. "You did it," he said. Emily tilted her head, almost a shrug, as if saying, "Of course I did." Rachel joined them, standing behind Emily in quiet support. She didn't need to speak. The applause came a moment later, scattered, hesitant, then swelling, but it was the kind that faded as quickly as it began, because no one wanted to shatter what had just happened. No one dared to claim it as theirs. The cake was cut. The candles were lit. Emily leaned forward and blew them out herself. No one held her. No one corrected her. She did it all in silence, her own way, in her own rhythm. After the guests began to leave, Nathaniel remained near the garden wall, watching Emily run her hands through the lavender blooms. Her balance was still uncertain, her steps deliberate, but she was moving. Freely, Rachel appeared beside him, her arms crossed loosely. She didn't do it for them, she said. She did it because she knew he wouldn't take it from her. Nathaniel nodded slowly, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I never thought this moment would come." "It's been coming for a long time," Rachel replied. She just needed to feel safe enough to let it arrive. He turned toward her. "And you made that possible." Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer and pointed to Emily, who had crouched down and was now holding a fallen blossom in her palm. "She made it possible," she said. "We just gave her the space." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and guests faded into the quiet, Nathaniel sat in the living room with Emily curled beside him on the couch. The house was calm again, the hum of celebration now just memory. Emily yawned once, her head resting on his side. "You walked," he said softly, stroking her hair. She didn't respond with words, but she slid her small hand into his. And in that moment, he knew this wasn't just a birthday. It was a beginning. The house returned to its familiar calm after Emily's birthday. The decorations came down, the cake was eaten, and the last traces of the guests disappeared with a fading scent of lavender still lingering in the air. But something had shifted beneath the routine. Nathaniel could feel it, a kind of fullness in the silence that had never been there before. Emily now walked freely through the house, at her own pace, without fanfare. She didn't hesitate as she crossed the kitchen floor, or moved from one room to another. She didn't wait for permission. She simply lived. Nathaniel found himself watching her less out of fear and more out of awe. What had once been tension between them was slowly dissolving into something easier, something quiet and deep. And yet, there was one thread still hanging in the background, something he kept on the edge of his thoughts for too long: Rachel. She was still present, still composed, still guiding when needed and stepping back when not. But now that Emily had walked in front of everyone, had claimed her independence, Nathaniel felt the shape of Rachel's presence differently. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore. She was a part of their story, a part of their home. He decided it was time to understand who she really was. That evening, after Emily was asleep and the house had settled into its usual hush, Nathaniel found Rachel on the back porch, a cup of tea in her hands. She wore a loose sweater over a faded shirt, her hair still slightly damp from a late shower. The air was cool and the garden lights bathed the hedges in soft amber. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She shook her head. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, Nathaniel turned toward her. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rachel glanced at him, not startled, only cautious. "Yes." "You said once that you knew Claire from college, that you had taken some classes together. But there's more to it, isn't there?" Rachel lowered her cup slightly. "Yes." Nathaniel waited. She sighed softly, the sound nearly lost in the breeze. "We weren't just classmates. We were friends, real friends, the kind of friendship that sits somewhere between soulmates and strangers." Nathaniel frowned slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't come here to relive the past," she said. "I came here to fulfill something Claire trusted me with, even if she never asked for it out loud." He turned to face her fully. "What does that mean?" Rachel set her cup down on the railing and clasped her hands together. "The semester before she found out she was pregnant, Claire and I took a seminar together. Something obscure about intuitive psychology. We spent hours outside class talking about things that made no sense on paper. About connection, memory, the way trauma rewires the body. Claire always said if she had a child, she wanted that child raised to be listened to, not just looked after." Nathaniel felt the weight of that settle in his chest. "You never mentioned that." "I wasn't sure it mattered. At least not at the start. I applied for the job because I needed the work. Yes, but when I saw your name and hers, something told me it was more than chance." He studied her face, searching for something buried beneath the calm. "She wrote you a letter," he said, "before Emily was born. You read it." Rachel nodded. "I kept it. I still do." "What did it say?" She hesitated, then answered. "She told me not to rush her daughter, not to overfill the silence, to make space for wonder." Nathaniel stared at the floorboards, then lifted his gaze. "You've done more than that. You gave her a way to speak, without words, a way to trust her own body again." Rachel's eyes met his. "That was never just me. That was her. And it was you, once you stopped trying to fix her." The words weren't said in accusation. They were gentle, honest. Still, something in Nathaniel burned to understand. Why did you really come here? Beyond the job, beyond the memory of Claire. Rachel looked away, toward the garden. "Because I owed her. Because once, years ago, when I was at my lowest, Claire saw me, not in the polite way most people claim to see others. I mean, really saw me, underneath the mask. She didn't try to change me. She just stayed." Her voice caught, just slightly, and Nathaniel felt something shift. "She saved me from myself," Rachel continued. "So when I saw that job listing and that photo of Emily, with those eyes that looked exactly like hers, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I came because I could not come." Nathaniel sat back, exhaling. The air between them was no longer filled with tension, but with the kind of clarity that only arrives after long silence. "You've never asked for anything in return," he said quietly. "I didn't come here to take," she replied. "I came to give back what Claire gave me. Nothing more." They sat in stillness for a long time, the sound of crickets and distant traffic filling the night. Then, almost hesitantly, Nathaniel said, "But maybe now there's something more to stay for." Rachel looked at him, her expression unreadable. He didn't reach for her. He didn't insist. He simply offered a possibility and waited. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. The next few weeks unfolded with a quiet fluidity that neither Nathaniel nor Rachel tried to define. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden declaration, only the natural adjustment of three lives learning to move together, not in synchronization, but in harmony. Emily's walking had become second nature. She no longer measured each step with calculation or caution. Instead, she moved like she was exploring, like the world was no longer something to be feared, but something to reach for. Her legs carried her across the garden paths, through the kitchen, up the staircase one step at a time. And more than her body, her spirit began to bloom. Nathaniel had taken a break from major projects. His firm had called twice with offers for a high-profile development in San Francisco, but he had declined both. He didn't say no out of burnout or disinterest. He said no because something else had begun to call him more deeply than glass towers and concrete ambition. He sat for long hours in his office now, sketching by hand instead of software, drafting ideas for spaces that were open, inclusive, layered with accessibility and softness. He began designing play centers with sensory textures, tree houses with ramps instead of ladders, classrooms without corners. His mind worked with a renewed clarity, fed not by the pressure of clients, but by the rhythms of a small child walking barefoot across hardwood floors. Rachel had not moved out. There was no official decision made, no conversation about permanence, but the rhythm of her presence had changed. She no longer folded her clothes neatly back into a suitcase each week. She left her favorite mug in the sink. Her books lined a section of the study shelf, and Nathaniel noticed. More than once, they cooked dinner side by side in comfortable silence. He washed. She chopped. Sometimes Emily sat on the counter, watching them with a narrow gaze that suggested quiet approval. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Nathaniel found Rachel outside in the garden again, not with tea this time, but with blueprints spread across the table. She had been sketching something herself, a layout for a children's therapy center, complete with music rooms and a library shaped like a spiral. He approached and sat beside her, not speaking right away. "You're designing now?" he asked eventually. Rachel smiled, "Just playing with ideas. You inspired me." He studied the drawing. "It's good. It's more than good. I want a place where kids can be more than their needs," she said softly. "A place that doesn't define them by what they haven't done yet." Nathaniel turned to her, thoughtful. "Would you do it? For real?" She shrugged. "I don't know where I'd start." He smiled slowly. "I'd do." In the days that followed, the idea became a shared obsession. They spent evenings at the kitchen table, poring over sketches, building models out of cardboard and clay. Emily would often join them, her fingers smudged with glue, placing tiny ramps or painting miniature chairs with wild colors. The project didn't just give shape to their evenings. It gave shape to something unspoken between Nathaniel and Rachel, a bond that had once been defined by shared grief, then by shared responsibility, now grew into shared vision. But the most profound change was not in the project or the rhythm of the household. It was in Emily herself. One morning, Nathaniel found her standing at the window, staring at the garden as the first drops of rain began to fall. She turned to him and said without hesitation, "Can we go outside?" It was the first full sentence she had ever spoken to him. He knelt beside her, stunned. "You want to go in the rain?" She nodded. He smiled. "Then we'll go." They stepped into the garden together. No jackets, no umbrellas. Just bare skin meeting soft drizzle. Rachel joined them seconds later, barefoot, laughing. Emily danced in a circle, arms wide, mouth open toward the sky. Nathaniel watched her, the rain soaking his shirt, and felt the weight of years lift from his shoulders. Later that night, as they dried off and warmed themselves by the fireplace, Rachel looked over at him. "She's not afraid anymore," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "Neither am I." And it was true. He no longer feared what he didn't understand in her silence. He no longer worried about milestones or timetables. He had learned to see her, truly see her, in every gesture, every pause, every breath. A week later, he received a package in the mail. It was from Claire's sister, a collection of old home videos she had digitized, some of which Nathaniel had never seen. One in particular caught his attention. Claire, 6 months pregnant, sitting in their old living room, speaking to the camera. "If you're watching this," she said, laughing, "I either made it through just fine or I didn't, and someone smart decided to keep this." Her voice softened. "Nate, if it's you watching, I want you to know something. I believe in you. You were always scared of becoming a father, but that's exactly why you'll be great at it, because you'll never stop learning." She placed a hand over her belly. "And you," she said smiling, "will know silence, and music, and space, and wonder. I don't care when you walk or talk. I just care that you're seen." The screen went dark. Nathaniel sat for a long time afterward, the laptop resting on his knees, the weight of her words reverberating in every part of him. He stood, walked into Emily's room, and found her asleep, curled around her fox. He sat on the floor beside her bed and whispered, "You are more than I ever knew how to ask for." The next morning, Emily woke early and crawled into his lap at the kitchen table. Rachel joined them minutes later, tousled from sleep. No one spoke, and yet everything was said. The end came softly, not as a final act, but as a gentle unfolding. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Nathaniel found the box. He hadn't been searching for anything in particular. The day was gray, the light low through the windows, and Emily was napping on the couch, one arm dangling over the edge, clutching her fox. Rachel was in the garden, tending to the now wild mint beds. Nathaniel, in a rare stretch of uninterrupted calm, wandered into the study to reorganize old files. And there it was, buried behind tax folders and architectural blueprints, a small wooden chest sealed with a faded ribbon. Claire's handwriting was on the tag, for later, if he ever stops. He sat down immediately, his breath caught somewhere in his throat. The lid creaked as he opened it, releasing a faint scent of sandalwood and something floral, one of Claire's old oils, no doubt. Inside were objects that seemed ordinary at first, a video camera, several labeled mini-tapes, and a soft linen pouch that clinked faintly when he picked it up. He opened the pouch first. Inside were 5 small wooden tokens, each carved with a different symbol, the same symbols Emily had been learning through Rachel's therapy. The spiral, the triangle, the wave, the square, and the sunburst. He held them in his hand like sacred pieces. The tapes came next. He powered on the camera and slid the first one into place. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Claire, seated in a rocking chair, a blanket draped over her swollen belly. The corners of her mouth curled into a smile that broke him. "This is for both of you," she said. "For Emily when she's ready. And for you, Nathaniel, when you finally understand what silence is trying to say." He watched for nearly an hour as she walked through each symbol, not just the gesture, but the feeling behind it. She spoke softly about grounding, about space, about how she wanted their daughter to learn the world, not through commands, but through attention. "I don't want her to just obey," she said. "I want her to wonder." One tape showed Claire setting objects on the floor, naming them in whispers, then using her fingers to trace patterns around them. "Every child has a language before words," she said. "This might be hers." There were more videos, her voice reading letters she had written to Emily for each birthday, up to her 6th. In each one, she spoke not with sadness, but with reverence, as if she already knew she wouldn't be there, and yet, in her absence, she was building a presence no one could erase. By the time Nathaniel closed the final tape, it was nearly noon. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of Rachel's laughter in the garden and the sound of Emily's quiet breathing in the next room. He packed the tapes carefully, then took the tokens and placed them in a small velvet box. That afternoon, when Emily woke, he sat beside her on the couch and opened it between them. "These were your mother's," he said. Emily reached out, running her fingers over the carvings. "The spiral," she said. "It means still." "Yes," he said softly. "And she left these for you. All of them, before you were born." Emily's eyes grew wide, not with shock, but with something else, recognition. Nathaniel didn't explain everything. Not yet, but he handed her the tokens one by one, naming each with her. "Triangle," she whispered. "Safe." "Wave," he said. "Change." "Square," she offered. "Home." "And this?" he asked, showing her the last. Emily took it carefully. "Shine." Nathaniel smiled. "Exactly." That night, after dinner, he asked Rachel to join them in the study. He played one of the tapes, not all of them, just the one where Claire explained the meaning of the spiral in more detail. Rachel watched in silence, her hand covering her mouth, tears balanced but never falling. "She knew," Rachel whispered. "She knew Emily would need a way to feel before she could speak." Nathaniel nodded. "And she knew you'd be the one to help her find it." They sat in stillness after that, the tape's blue glow flickering against the walls. Emily had curled up at her fox again, her head in Nathaniel's lap, eyes drifting shut not from fatigue, but from peace. Later that week, They returned to Claire's old studio, now cleaned and reorganized. Nathaniel and Rachel had turned it into a quiet learning space, filled with paints, music instruments, and soft floor cushions. The walls were lined with Emily's drawings, spirals, suns, abstract lines that curved with curiosity. In the center of the room was a large table where the plans for the therapy center were unfolding rapidly. Investors had been contacted. A friend from Nathaniel's firm offered to help with funding. Rachel had been writing the program guide, and Nathaniel had designed the first architectural drafts. They named it the Listening Place. On the day the land was approved, Nathaniel took Emily to the foundation site. There was nothing but open grass and sky, but he knelt beside her and said, "This is where other kids like you will come." She looked up at him. "Will they walk too?" "Some will," he said. "Some won't, but they'll all be heard." Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out one of the wooden tokens. The spiral. She walked over to a patch of earth, crouched, and buried it just beneath the soil. Rachel, standing nearby, watched with a hand over her chest. What made her do that? Nathaniel asked softly. Rachel didn't answer right away. Then she said, she knows this was her mother's story too. That night, as twilight bled into the windows and the city lights hummed beyond the hills, Nathaniel sat alone in his study, with Claire's last tape still playing. Her voice filled the room one final time. "If she ever walks, Nate, I hope you don't cry because of what you missed. I hope you cry because of what you finally saw." And he did, not because he was grieving, but because for the first time he saw it all. And for once, it was enough.